First things first, I'd like to introduce both ourselves and the organization. So myself, I'm Fatai. Sometimes I go by Comrade F. I'm based in the African diaspora. I'm based in Washington, D.C., as well as the state of Maryland, United States of America. And I'm with this organization, the Movement for African Emancipation, which is a Pan-African socialist revolutionary organization based in Lagos, Nigeria. The goal of the MAE is to pretty much form a new African citizen, a citizen that is well aware of their historical and material conditions, why things are the way they are in specifically Nigeria, and by extension, the whole continent of Africa, so that we can the people, the youth, everybody who is involved or wants to be involved can come bring about a very much necessary needed social transformation of the society that we currently see in Nigeria and by extension Africa. And today I have the wonderful pleasure of interviewing my wonderful comrade who is actually based in Lagos, Nigeria. He goes by Comrade Shango, and I'll give Shango the floor so he can tell us a little bit about himself, and then we can get to the interview.
Yeah, thanks very much, Comrade Fatai. And it's good for us to have this chat. I'm Shango Omojola, member of the Movement for African Emancipation, as you have said. And I think basically we've been here for some years trying to build, conscious, an organization based on, having conscious members, really who understand the nature of the society we're dealing with, and how to solve the key problems of the society. And it's been it's been a good ride. We've been moving on, and I think I'll leave any other introduction of myself to we're gonna have some more talk, which will concern with my family, and so I think that. Thank
Yes, and thank you for allowing me to even be in this space. So, without further ado, I would like to begin the interview process. So, most of the questions will be directed at Shango, but he will be asking me questions just to clarify for everybody who is in attendance or will be watching this. So, it's kind of a two-way interview, but mostly directed for Shango, but I will answer questions as well, and any questions that he answers or launches towards me. So, first question is more of a personal question. Tell us who you are as a person and what was your upbringing like in Nigeria to give us a foundational understanding of who Kamara Shango is, what can we expect from Kamara Shango, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so really, I think I should say one of the reasons we are having this discussion today is Independence Day, and independence. I put a hyphen between in and dependence, so most people get that. Independence Day, and 63 years of Nigeria having won some flag, nominal freedom from the colonizers. And a key person who was involved in the struggles, throughout a lot of that time period was my father, Baba Mojola. And we want to do a library in his memory, a memorial socialist library. He was somebody who collected a lot of books. He actually had his own library, which we call the Frederick Engels Memorial Library. But we think it's more appropriate that we rename the library after him. He passed 10 years ago, and he was very active, the struggle before independence, and so I am his son, of course, and I somehow after his sinful of Baba Mojola. It's not necessarily something that would have happened, but talking about my own background, I think there was certainly the influence of being with a person like that. I was born in Kano, Nigeria, in the north of Nigeria, in 1975. The year is important because it's also a year of certain significant struggles. That was 15 years after independence. And Kano was a place in which socialist revolutionaries, they had been active since independence. They the country, rather than stay in their comfort zones. And my father moved to Kano, and Kano was a place where some socialism had been growing, under the mass party called the People's Redemption Party. This is formerly a movement called the Northern Elements Progressive Union, NIPU, and so Kano was quite a place where socialists were quite active. They had a mass party that was for the interest of the working people, poor people. We were called the Talakawas. And you also had the scientific socialist revolutionaries who were doing all sorts of work across the country. So in Kano, where I was born, where I was brought up, Bohemia Quarters was the house was actually an institution. It was a library. It was a center. It was a meeting place. It was always busy with all sorts of comrades and events. And so, I mean, I would have been too young to understand what was going on, but all the same, that was the atmosphere. I was actually looking through some of Baba Mojola's papers recently, and there was a calendar, I think, in 1982, which talks about children growing up under a humanist education in Bohemia Quarters, with myself and so many other children. We used to be so many children as well as the adults who interacted. It was a community space, and grateful to have had that kind of scenario, even though I was quite young to really understand what was going on, because events happened, and that ended. But all the same, we moved to Lagos while I was still schooling in Lagos, and it still was a place where, when I finally finished secondary school, immediately I got involved in stuff, because that time was the time of the pro-democracy movement, the movement against the military. And my father was very active in that, so he was arrested and locked up many times, and I had to actually leave the family and fight for his freedom. So I got quite involved and was always involved. I was active in helping to build something called the Constitutional Conference in 1991, which was an attempt, it was called a People's Constitution, for when the military would leave, which was the military did not allow that conference to happen, but I remember being an organizer around that. Also, we used to be an archivist for Baba Mojola, and I used to do his filing and read a lot of socialist material, helped him to proofread a book he wrote on Nigeria's political history called about Michael Imodu, who is known as number one, labor leader number one, who was the first major labor leader in Nigeria, who was very active in the struggle for independence, and very active afterwards. So I had to read the whole book as a proofreader.
Yes, he was also from not NLC, but Nigerian Youth. I can't remember the acronym, but it was one of the early labor, I guess labor union, labor council, labor movements. I can't remember the name of it. when it was a precursor to the Socialist Workers and Farmers Party in Nigeria, I
Yes,
want to say.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
That's right.
So, yes.
He was very active politically, like Modu. He was strong socialist, scientific socialist, not somebody who had any form of formal education. He was a railwayman and uh, and um, and very very committed socialist route and other parties. He was a PRP, president of the PRP, but at that time there was a faction because there was the usual opportunism that affects what in Nigeria happened, and there was a Nigeria Labour Party at one time
Yes.
that I don't think was registered, um, and so yes, like Onodu active, very active for so many years. So, and his history is also the history you can read about the history of the struggle for independence, which was very active. I just say lastly, in terms of background, that despite having the luck to have access to, some things, was always a person who was influenced by my society, indoctrinated by my society. I went to boarding school. It was easy to be indoctrinated by all sorts of capitalist biases. So despite all this, I never would have even turned out to be a revolutionary or necessary. But one key factor that helped me actually, which I find funny, which is why I think political education is very important, because I had access to, books, readings. I used to listen to Fela Kuti music every day because my father had, he always had the Fela Kuti, and the music was helpful, but that didn't conscientize me. It didn't really do that much. It was the day I picked up Malcolm X's autobiography that my life changed, that I decided I wanted to be a revolutionary. Um, so, it taught me about the importance of political education, about young people having books to study, to discussion, because the societal influences are very strong. So, I'll just say that. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you so much. And you actually, with that statement, you said how you were influenced by the society around you. That actually leads us to the next question I would like to ask, which was more so talking about the day-to-day struggles that are present in Nigeria and how you think scientific socialism can help Nigerians overcome such hardships. Like, just give us no, there's going to be a gigantic window. You can talk from A to Z about all the hardships, but give us a few glimpses of the realities that the average Nigerian would face under, capitalist imperialist domination in neo-colonial society.
Yeah. Um, and it's interesting when you go through the history of Nigeria, you now find that it is only scientific socialism that has got us anywhere in struggle. Um, I was actually reading a history that Baba wrote in his archives. We're going to release the archives, so there's a lot of information. I can see this
Imagine.
30 years, uh, 30 years of the Nigerian socialist movement.
Mm.
30 years. That was written in 1972. Um,
And who
and
was
there's,
that
there's
by?
a
I'm
part in
sorry.
it by Baba Mojola.
Oh, okay, well, okay,
By
well,
yeah,
okay.
yes. So there's a line in it which says, "Without socialists, this homeland would have been sold down the drain earlier than the sellout later." What he was referring to was that, you know, we wouldn't even have had independence if it wasn't for socialism. We fought, it was fought for, and we would have even been able to make that a genuine independence. We did for some time, you know, and but there were always the opportunists, the sellouts, and these are all capitalists, ideologues, people who believe in the system of capitalism. These are all often middle class, upper class people, and it is for any understanding. If you were to read for example, we were to read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm X was not at that time a socialist. I mean, anytime declared to be a socialist per se, but it did evolve towards socialism. But when you read even that book, you would have an understanding that any issues, societal issues, are only causes, any serious societal issues and the struggle against exploitation. What are the factors that drive exploitation? Um, and for example, Malcolm X understood, imperialism and racism in the United States, but you now get to understand over time the class divisions, why exploitation, how exploitation occurs, what drives other types of exploitation. And so you cannot see Nigeria with the history it has of colonialism, neocolonialism, and not have a class understanding of that society. Otherwise, you just want to do window dressing. That is, the non-socialists simply wanted to have so-called independence. The British, but they did not want to go further than that. They were happy to stay within the imperialist system and have a system of exploitation where they sent out the raw materials and they exploited the workers and maintain, so no significant change. Whereas the socialists fought for the root, for root changes, away from the system of imperialism, away from exploitation. So I find it funny that any people can claim to be struggling this country without understanding the basis of scientific socialism, that it is the only solution, it is the only antidote to capitalist imperialism. And certainly, more than that, scientific socialists are organized as people who try to understand the society. So they build consciousness. They actually want people to be educated. Whereas you find a lot of those who supposedly are in the arenas of struggle thinking that they are fighting on behalf of the people and do not have any interest in the people's own enlightenment. So you find that they actually cannot even run proper organizations. In the history I've seen, any organizations, whether it is for democracy, whether it's for independence, anything, if it did not have socialists, it couldn't be organized. There was no possible organization. So they were happy to work with socialists for those struggles because otherwise they would have been useless, even for the limited things they were fighting for. So I think that's the condition we're in. There's no other solution but on the basis of scientific socialism. And I was going to ask you too your own thoughts anyway. Like you have your own in your own context.
Yeah.
I mean, you're of Nigerian origin, but you're in the belly of the beast.
Exactly.
And what do you think? Because you're talking about imperialism, racism, and all that. What do how do you see the issue of scientific socialism to addressing all those issues?
Within the context that I dwell in, so for scientific socialism to happen, there first needs to be a removal of the settler dominancy that is within the belly of the beast and in a lot of the dominant countries in Western society. So that's the United States, it's Canada, these places are separate entities. So we can't even first talk of scientific socialism in that respect until the question of settler colonialism or settler created entities are ultimately defeated. And that's also a question that has to be answered on the continent of Africa as well. There still are settler colonies that exist. The most popular one that we know of is South Africa. It may not be in the United States of America, but there are still locations if you look in South Africa, the locations that are primarily either white dominated or minority inhabited. So it's a similar context in the context that I live in. So in order for scientific socialism to reign supreme on this land, the context of settler colonialism must be tackled and properly understood so it can be defeated. So yes.
Yeah.
So another thing I want you to touch on is some of the day-to-day struggles that are present in Nigeria. Say traveling, getting hold of resources, education. Like give the viewers an understanding of what it is like to do what would think to be simple for those of us who dwell in the West. When you think of traveling, it's you don't think of it as a very enduring task, but in Nigeria, it's a window.
I'm sorry, you were break there. You, I'm not sure if my internet is now playing up. Um, just need to sorry about my internet because it's been breaking up. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
Would you like me to repeat what I said?
Yeah.
Yes, I can do that.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. It was
yes,
breaking up.
so I was asking if you can give the viewers a slight window as to what it is like to go through the day-to-day struggles in Nigeria. And I was saying maybe you could speak on perhaps education or perhaps transportation or even just coming by, consumer goods that people need. So, hello, are you still there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Your screen froze
Yeah.
a bit, but you're back.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so what it's like day-to-day struggles, and I think you know, it's the thing for this country is like since independence, there has been a deliberate attempt by the ruling class to do three things: um, make people poor. So it isn't necessarily that their system just fails absolutely. It is a deliberate strategy to have poverty, because they understand it disarms people. If you keep them poor and then you throw crumbs at them from time to time, it is a tactic to disempower them. They also ensure that they don't have education. Again, it's to disempower people. And the third key strategy is ethnic division. Um, to um, keep the people divided. And they learned all this very well from the British, right? So, so for the people's day-to-day struggle, I mean, struggle here has become extremely difficult. This is the reality we have today. We might speak about the struggle of those before us, um, where they were strong and they were able to win, certain concessions and keep the ruling class on their toes and things like that. But we've now come to a stage in which there's been a to and fro battle, of course, between the socialist movement and the ruling class. And the ruling class in the present time has come out on top. And now we have to struggle in a very limited environment in which the people are lacking education, lacking access to books, information. They've been misdirected in their, terms of various the media, and they are very poor. Now, right now, people say the the inflation is through the roof. Um, people are really struggling to survive, and people are surprised that there isn't a rebellion. But it is in the context of their everyday struggles that people still have to deal with. How do we, understand the need to organize? Where are the leaders that would organize? And in doing that, you find that there's the context of a lack of finance to do anything. There's the context of ability to reach people. So, um, so I think that is the context in which we have to organize it. Yeah, I'm not sure. Does that address the question?
Yeah, you talk about the day-to-day struggles as why, things aren't going the way they should be going, why the hardships are there. You talked about the intentional uh, extension of poverty. You talk about the intentional limiting of education, not just the limiting of it, putting a paywall behind it. So if you already know that there's lack of funds for the average Nigerian, the average Nigerian won't be able to, continue their education, or they'll find it rather difficult to continue their education. And then you also mentioned how class plays a role, and how the ruling class uses inter and intra-ethnic politics to to stir the pot. So even if there is a glimpse of some sort of a unified struggle towards the ruling class, they sprinkle in their tribalism there, to to quell any type of rebellion. So yeah, that does answer the question. That does provide a lot of insight. So thank you for that. All right. So I'm gonna move on to the next question. You kind of touched on it, but maybe you can give a little bit more detail. So the next question is, what exactly was it about Nigeria that pushed you towards scientific socialism? And again, you touched on it because you're pretty much in that upbringing. You're in a community of socialists, but if you can provide a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think uh, um, to decide to you know to decide to go with scientific socialism. Like I said, the book that made me conscious, Malcolm X's autobiography, the other autobiography. But that just made me a black nationalist. I am not saying it's bad to be a black nationalist,
But you wanted to take
but
a
that
step
was it. That's where I
further.
was. Right. So I have to move further to understand the society that I'm in. And it is when I got involved in struggle with students and working struggles, and I started to see further into the nature of exploitation, especially in Nigeria. We start to connect more of the dots, and relate to, very importantly, of course, in struggle, we relate to those who have you know political education, and will give you political education. So once you get active in struggle, and then you start to have interactions with people, start to get political education, read more widely, then I think you will find, that you would be pulled towards scientific socialism, which also encompasses the understanding of racism, imperialism, and for scientific socialism. For us, the primary issue in Nigeria, is imperialism. It's not because it's imperialism or something else, but imperialism is a primary issue, and we understand it on the class basis. We understand it in the system as a system of capitalism. We understand that the people who are going to be able to stop it, the people who are going to be able to change it, are the working people, who are the majority, and who really have nothing to lose but their chains, as someone put it. So we understand all these things. So then scientific socialism should guide our struggle. Yeah.
Yes, that was very well put. I definitely admire the fact that you're saying that, imperialism, like you're listing the primary contradictions that the people in Nigeria, and then by extension the continent of Africa, face, and imperialism has to be at the top of the list. And that was the first thing you mentioned. So it gives an understanding that, with this is definitely a question of domination, class-based domination, whether it's indigenous in your case, because you're actually on the continent, and then foreign domination as well. So we're in that arena, and it's, as scientific socialists, we have to be vehemently aware of such. So yes, that leads me to the next question I want to ask. This one is a shift away from you per se, but more about your father. I would like for you to speak to us about your father and how much of an influence he was to you, both politically speaking and personally speaking.
Yeah. My father was born to uh, a reverend father, so a member of the church, and who had decided to abandon his people's traditions. I mean, literally. Um, this is somebody who was called Oya Juiton. Oya, the goddess,
Good, yeah.
Nigerian goddess.
Yeah,
Deity.
wife of Shango,
That
actually.
was his family. Yeah. that's his family. That's his family lineage to be Shango and Oya. That's their lineage. That's the name he was given. He changed it to Olajuitan because he believed that he was now a Christian. He needed not to worship idols. I
As
only
they
mention
say.
this because it's the fact is that despite my father was brought up, but still, his reverend father was still someone who still understood his roots. Just, but with a lot of the elite in those days, people in those days, having a Christian education, whatever, being part of the church was a way to, move ahead in a society that was crisis ridden, that imperialists had come in. And but he still, my grandfather, he still maintained his roots. He was a very strong person with regards to his roots, apart from those things. And that's how he brought, children up, and he brought them up in a very community environment. So my father grew up in big houses where, there might be 30 children, being cared for. So he got brought up in a very community spirit environment, also very African, despite the Christianity, that was part of it. So, and I think so that also had an influence on him, um, but he decided to return back to his roots more than his own father. So he became, he became Marxist, but all the same, before he became a Marxist, he had decided that he primarily going to emphasize his own roots, the Shango lineage, the Oya lineage, Ifa, and he picked up Ifa and he became a very strong advocate of Ifa, the Yoruba cosmology, um, and he sort of merged that with Marxism, for him, and that is, we understand things from the Marxist viewpoint, but we also understand, that imperialism has come and taken away what we, the roots we have, and so we have to also fight to defend our Africanness, our African values, the values of community and and so on. So that was what drove him, throughout his life. He got involved in the struggle for South Africa. That was, I think, the main the struggle against apartheid. And he went to London, UK, to study university. So there was a community of African organizations that was organizing Africans to fight against apartheid. So he got very actively involved in that. That was, and from there, got involved in the struggle actually at the time when Algeria was at war for independence from France, and got involved in that struggle. Went to Algeria, and uh, and then he returned back to Nigeria and continued to struggle around the issues of apartheid until South Africa became free. He was a very active organizer to support the armed struggle, in particular in Southern Africa, and then of course we have the issues local to Nigeria, so I think I won't say much about influenced me because I think I covered much of that before. You know, even the religious, because growing up I don't think I knew anybody who emphasized Ifa. So and we were always brought up, yes, with the African tradition, but in a different way, in a way we didn't see, in a kinder way, shall we say, because the way people take the traditions here is maybe uh, to find ways to be harsh. It's more like merge it with Christianity, and so everything is like your upbringing. It's always there's going to be a harsh father is going to cane you every day,
Yeah.
and girls should know their place, and learn how to stay in the kitchen, and know. So I was brought up in a very strict moral, understanding, but without any uh, physical, physical discipline,
I know
you
what you
know.
mean. Yeah.
And yeah, so it used to intrigue me in many cases that, well, he was, this person was different, and it also helps you to connect to the political side of things, like, but the moral aspects too, they influenced me, and I find it better than the caning methodology. It's like, you are brought up, you are taught constantly the importance of community. You're brought up, for example, it would take me out at 5 in the morning. Um, we go out and we might go to somewhere like Mushin in Lagos, for the no Lagos, and it would point to the people on the streets, like people are already out at 5 in the morning, still very dark, and they are to and fro, and like they are going to work, they are struggling to survive. Um, and those are the people who keep the city, this country, make it what it is. So I used to get those kind of lessons. I lived in a house that was always full. Everybody shared food equally. Visitors come. We could have up to 20 visitors a day, and everybody would eat, and we all sit around the table and eat in a community fashion, and we learn to share with, not even just individual members of the family. So I, uh, we had many children that, my age or older or younger that my father used to care for, sent to school. So they were under his care. They went to school. They, and so I learned to value that community spirit, which is genuinely African. Um, there's so many other things I could say, but I think I've stopped. Right? Yeah.
No, but you've said a lot of very, very interesting, very, very well needed things, especially the point where you said that your father helped instill the concept of that community living. Because as you know, and for those of us who may or may not know, like in Ifa, that's one of the core tenets stressed, like community living, community sharing, community raising children, so on and so forth. And even beyond Ifa, like I think that's one of the core tenets that you can find commonly across the board on the African continent, whether we're talking Northern Africa, Southern Africa, West, East, Central. So these tenets of, like this concept of individualism, or to the point that we see it to now, it's pretty much imported. And we've had authors and writers actually write about this, such as Walter Rodney. He touches on this in two of his works that I know of, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa and The Groundings of Our Brothers, so on and so forth. So the fact that your father, um, he was well aware of this. He did the whole decolonize, like he didn't let that aspect of colonization. And this is a man who was born when Nigeria was a colony. He he found a way to navigate through it from based on what you're telling me, and he found a way to pass that down to you. So that's very, very significant. So very much appreciative of that. And since we did talk about the political and the personal, that leads me on to the next question, actually. So, with regards to a Nigerian Marxist or scientific socialist, this can be current or this can be past figures. So, this question is more so, who are some of the past historical figures that stand out the most to you and why? You know, aside from your father.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there were quite a lot of them. And when you say the past and the present I can struggle to think of hardly anybody.
We can stick with the past.
And yes, when I go back, and I'm wild at how many there are. But influencing, yes, the main one for me, Olaoni, who actually had an influence on me too directly. So for those who might not know, Olaoni, actually he and my father went to university together. Uh, about the same time. So they knew each other from way back. And Laoni was based in Ibadan, and he was a very key organizer. He was the key organizer of the Socialist Workers Farmers Party.
Yes.
and really, very strong. But the thing about Olani, because based on today's, reason why I'm doing this today, is that I used to go with my father to Olani's place in Ibadan very much when I was quite young, and they would sit to meet, and they would tell me to go inside. There was a library and a bookshop right inside, and I got a lot of political education. Even just reading novels, I read Country's Hard. It got me to understand this country.
Straight to the point.
I might not have picked up any Marxist books or anything, but I had a lot to to benefit from, and that's what Olani, everyone knew to go to Olani's bookshop to get important books and to read there, and so yes, it was a big influence on so many people um, on the left in Nigeria. Another one, Escotoyo, who was also, older than I think, my father's generation, quite
You,
older. But he
you
was
say Toyo, do you
the
mean
theoretician of the left.
do you mean Esco Toyo?
Yes, Escotoyo,
Okay, yes.
yes. Yeah. There was a theoretician, economist, and might not have written so many books, but wrote quite a lot of articles and pamphlets and so on, and was a very strong organizer. Um, so someone else quite important, Kola Gbodi, who was strongly involved in the labor education. That was where he really focused on. So to educate the working class, very strong communists, um, and someone I also, had some influence on me as well. He stayed in his house once when my father was in prison,
Mm.
and he had a nice library. And I remember I was in his house and the Soviet Union fell.
Ah,
That was 1991, and he had these men sitting around the television. I just remember they all had these sad faces.
I can
And I thought,
imagine.
why are they so sad? But now I know why they were sad. So
Yeah.
um, there's speaking of the theoreticians, Bade Onimode.
I was waiting for
Um,
you to say it.
yeah, and Bade Onimode used to work with my father and the work side of things to earn a living. So they worked in a consultancy um, together for many years, and yeah, he was he's a key theoretician, and anybody who
Yes.
hasn't read his books should get them and
Yes.
and read. Yeah, and really understanding of imperialism, you its economic basis. Uh, so of course, I've mentioned Imodu. So
Yes.
we'll go back there. But just lastly, I also not lastly, Akabashon is someone who influenced my father a lot. Actually, he was the leader of the community of African organizations in London, organizing around South Africa. But he had to leave the UK to come back to Nigeria for personal reasons. So he left my father, organizing that organization. But he was very strong. He's a lawyer, a very, very strong, committed socialist. Throughout his life, very influential, and they all looked up to him. Um, and of course, there's Funmilayo,
Yes.
Ransom Kuti, who is someone that might not come to mind as a scientific socialist or Marxist, but my father really looked up to her, and they actually ended up, in struggle together, especially with the links to building links towards Nkrumah in Ghana, and she was always a reliable socialist comrade. My father, in fact, he said, there was a time when he was organizing a movement for popular democracy, which was a left coalition, and he remembered that he asked her to bring Fela Kuti,
Mm.
because Kuti will not naturally consider himself to be part of that circle or necessarily go to such a thing, but she actually brought Fela Kuti to that conference. Was it yeah? There was a conference of Nigerian socialists, and so she really is. She was such a powerful figure, but she actually adopted scientific socialism, as an ideology. Yeah, that's it.
Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, to touch on from Lara on some Kuti, it is actually not as well known as you said that she was, an adopter of scientific socialism. She actually had visited the Soviet Union. She had, I think, won the Lenin Peace Award, the Lenin Peace Prize. Like she was, like it's actually very underreported of her political leanings, so on and so forth. And all the other people that you've mentioned, I have a lot of their books. I have Bade Olumide. He's one of the big influences for me, understanding Nigeria. Escotoyo, I've read a lot of his works online. I don't have any physical copies of his works. But yes, there are a lot of Nigerian Marxists or scientific socialists who uh, don't necessarily get the light of day. They're not as popular as, say, Walter Rodney, who, to be honest with you, isn't all that popular if you really go on the broad spectrum of, I guess the left, so to speak, the Kwame Nkrumah, so on and so forth. But it is good to know that there has been, there still is a very, very strong desire to grow these socialist spaces, these scientific socialist spaces, and with you, you're definitely doing the work to keep that desire strong and burning in Nigeria in the present day. And and the last thing I wanted to touch is the fact that they were all of them, each and every single last one of them were organizers. They all organized. They knew the importance of organizing. They knew that the struggle, it's not an individual thing. It's definitely a collective thing. And that leads me to the next question that I have, which is more about the organizing in Nigeria. So, if you could, we would like for you to explain to us, what is it like to organize in Nigeria? What are the difficulties and hardships that you have experienced in the field of organizing in Nigeria?
Yeah. So I think maybe um, touched on this a bit before, but it's the issue really is this poverty and lack of education, and lack of leadership in this case. So now we might have been speaking of these great leaders, but I think that and these leaders, I should say, they were very impactful in their time, but and people wonder, well, did they just fight for nothing, or did they was it all a waste of time? And that would be to not understand the impacts they made, the freedoms we enjoy today because of the fights they made. So rather than think that having that leadership is not going to take us anywhere, it's rather to ask, why don't we have that kind of leadership today? Why don't we have those kind of organizations today? And what can we do to build them? Because these were people, who were really committed, but with a clear understanding of the society, who were, that's the basis, the importance of political education. It's not just to struggle for struggle's sake, it's to have a clear political education of cadres. And I think that is what we have to emphasize today. This is what makes struggle difficult, because a lot of young people are not able to access information. Funny enough, we're in the information age, don't they call it? We have access to all sorts of means of getting information. We're bombarded with it, and yet there's much less political education or reading of socialist works or reading about your society than there was in 1930. I mean, one thing you find if you look at all this was the political education that drove, those organizations, and the clear, principled uh, positions that they had, in terms of, we are not afraid to call ourselves socialist or scientific socialist. That's what we are, and we're going to fight on that basis. And we're going to be clear about imperialism. But now we seem to have struggle. This leader is bad, that leader is bad, and there's been a de-emphasizing of that. how do we take education to the masses? How do we relate with them? Those are the key problems we have to solve. That's what makes organizing difficult. Of course, the poverty is a significant factor, but it cannot be the main reason why organizing has become so difficult. We keep on hearing about finance and it's an issue, but these old guys, they understood finance was an issue. Their poverty was high then in those days, but they took a strategy out to solve the issues of finance. Um, and they did what they had to do to make sure that they were financed. So the avenues are there to overcome that obstacle. But so really um, solving the issue of principle as well of standing on scientific socialism, which I think many of the current generation are too afraid of, and building a core dedicated base of people who understand these things, who can now build with the masses, who can get to to get them to support their struggles, because the other issue is like too many people think that you just say things are bad in this country and the masses will follow you, rather than understanding how you should relate to the masses' own immediate, material issues, to build struggles around those things, to join them in their struggles. Um, so I think, there are those in the left today who are addressing some of these things in Nigeria, but I think we are still far from where we need to be. Um, and just lastly say, that's we want to build a library and a center that we think we are very excited to want to do this. We feel that the potential is going to be very strong to have in Lagos, as students, workers, members of the community, from all over can have a place to just go, look at literature, have discussions, engage, ideologically. We feel it will actually contribute much um, to starting to build, to contribute to the, to political education and building of leadership that we need in this country. This is why we want to do it. So I'll stop there. And I was going to ask you in turn what you would think about, what you say to the importance of an institution like that for building political education.
It's funny that you asked that because that's the next and last question. But yes, I do want to touch on that. But before I touch on that, I want to touch on something you said earlier in regards to the crowd. There was in modern day, if you talk about scientific socialism or even quote unquote leftism in Nigeria in the public spaces, it's kind of, it's you're not going to get much, unfortunately. Whereas, versus the political education that we saw, like say in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, or maybe even in the 30s prior to, flag independence, we saw a little bit more of that. There was more of a desire. I don't want to, oh, there was a desire to understand things a little bit more, but I do remember reading regarding the Nigerian left history, Nigerian socialist history, that there was constant struggle against the socialists and the scientific socialists. As you mentioned before, you were in league with some of these people who have been arrested, who've probably been subject to maybe police harassment, military harassment, so on and so forth. And that has actually contributed to I would like to say, a decline in the thoughts in Nigerian spaces and circle. Not saying that they aren't there, but that's definitely been the goal of the ruling class, to stamp out any attempt at such a social transformation to the point where it's virtually non-existent or not a threat at the current stage. And even when it comes to accessing accessing books, like say accessing books on say scientific socialism, understanding material conditions, so on and so forth. It's actually a lot easier for people who are outside of Nigeria to access books regarding Nigeria than it is for people in Nigeria to access these books. So I think that also plays a huge role in the lack of the political education or political awareness or class consciousness that we see in Nigeria. And this is all intentional. This is all by designs. And I think there were even attacks that had happened where maybe there was destruction of these books, destruction of these works commissioned by the then heads of states during the military regime, so on and so forth. So I think all of that plays a huge, significant role in the lack thereof or the not as adequate political education that we see in Nigeria, which leads to the final question, uh, which will also lead to the question that you propose in regarding the institutions that we would like to see built. So the last question that I have is, what was the deciding factor that prompted you, along with the movement for African emancipation, into wanting a socialist memorial library slash Pan-African Center created? And how do you see such a thing impacting the use of Nigeria? And we have to also keep in mind that Nigeria's population, a lot of the population, I want to say close to 50%, if I remember correctly, is, quote unquote youth. So Nigeria has a very young budding population. So I wanted to see how this scientific socialist center would positively impact the youth, according to you.
Yeah, I think, first of all, Movement for African Emancipation was formed, to based on, building young leaders, new leaders, and it's based on the, who are conscious, like I explained before, who are conscious about the reasons for why Africa is where it is and what are the solutions. And of course, education has always been primary for us, political education. And we feel that we do what we can with the capacity we have been able to, but we always intended to have a center, just simply a center, where you could have people do political education, discussions, and things like that. But we weren't thinking necessarily of a library as such. But I think recently, taking stock of actually the large amount of books that Baba Mojana left behind, which he always wanted to be for his library, the Frederick Engels Memorial Library. We decided we have something we can use to build not just a center but a library. We have some material, we have some books. There's no need for those books to go to waste. They're not going to sit where nobody is going to read them. So we're going to put them out there, and of course get other books and material that will be interesting to people. And I think in Nigeria, in the history of Nigeria too, students have been very key to struggle, to the success of struggle. And we've actually been having to deal with, for a long time, a lack of an active students' union or conscious students like they used to be. So I think that having such a center can be, a rallying point to really reach out to students and have them come to a place where they can, learn and, get some good information. So I think, that for us is one of the main reasons too we want to do that. And I think just beyond students, there will be students, young people. I think the community at large, working people, everyone, to have access to such kind of material. Well, I think it's so essential. And there's another comrade of my father, I mean, didn't mention before, who died quite recently, Lawi Sonda, who was a colleague of Olaoni in Ibadan. And he kept on telling me many years before he died that we need a library or we need a bookshop or we need, he kept on emphasizing and emphasizing. And unfortunately he died recently, but I think that has always driven me that this needs to be done. So, and it's it's a place where we know we will be doing. People can come in, see what kind of books they would like to read. They can read there, interact there. But we would be having regular, I think, political education sessions, book readings, things like that. And we will be trying to reach out to students, at least in Lagos, to be aware of the place. And so that's it. I hope people, I leave it to you, but we should let people know we are doing a fundraiser.
Yes, I was gonna drop. Yes, yes. But I also want to touch on a lot of things that you mentioned and some of the things that we mentioned regarding political education in Nigeria and its current level. So I forgot to mention this, but I put it in the comments. During the 50s, so this is when the British were gearing up to leave and put their civil servants, who are also semi-feudalists, in the position of the powers of the ruling class. So before their departure, they set up anti-communist committees within, the colonial administration. And based on its name itself, you can tell what type of action they were behind. They were dedicated in, publicizing anti-socialist, anti-Marxist, anti-Soviet information. They're spreading this information, so on and so forth. They were, I wouldn't say they was attempting at banning certain books, certain left-leaning books. So that was pretty much instilled into the population prior to the British leaving and giving Nigeria flag independence 60 days, 2 years ago today. So that to me speaks on the necessity of why a socialist memorial library is needed, because those who we struggle against on a class basis, they understand the significance of education. They know the significance of information, and they know how to manipulate information, create disinformation, misinformation, and noise, so on and so forth, to the point where, people, instead of actually analyzing their material conditions or understanding what's going on, they look the wrong direction, they go the wrong direction, they don't really know how to critically analyze, so they can't, launch an effective attack and an effective constant struggle. So the fact that we want the MAEU, everybody who's involved wants to create a socialist memorial library, that will let the workers, the informal, formal workers, people in the community, students, so on and so forth, that gives them a means of not only defending from decades worth of propaganda, but it also gives them a means of launching an attack of their own, a struggle of their own, a constant continuous struggle of their own to combat anti-intellectual nonsense, to combat years and decades worth of capitalist propaganda, imperialist propaganda, and to give them the tools they need, the ideological tools they need to understand their situation, so they can march and progress toward a total social transformation of the societies, whether it's Nigeria or wherever they may be. So I think that's a very, very significant thing that we want to achieve with the MAE. And as Kamar Shango said, we do have a fundraiser that we have.
I think, not sure, Comrade F, frozen.
Sorry, my connection
Yeah,
was not connecting. I was
yeah, it
trying
was
to
frozen.
find. Yes, I was. There we go. How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Sorry, I was having difficulties, but yes, I was talking about the link to the fundraiser. I've dropped it into the chat. I'm going to pin it. So this fundraiser is to help create the Baba Mojala Socialist Memorial Library / Pan African Center. So this is what Shango was talking about. the need for such an institution to exist is very imperative to help the masses in Nigeria based on Lagos, and pretty much it will expand to this education will expand to the whole of Nigeria to help them understand why Shango does what he does, why the people in Nigeria who want to create a social transformation do what they do. It will serve as a means to uh, it will serve as a means to come not only to combat the illiteracy, combat under illiteracy, but a means of combating years and decades worth of years and decades worth of pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist rhetoric that has pretty much plagued the minds of Nigerians for countless decades. Yes, I've linked GoFundMe. It is pinned, and I'm gonna ask Shango if you have any closing remarks.
Um, no, thanks for that, Comrade F, and thanks for leading this today. I think we just people should help us to share the fundraiser so we can get this thing going. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. And again, thank you for having me. Thank you for the Movement for African Emancipation for allowing me to even do this interview. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your time. And again, we want to remember that the struggle continues, or as they say in Portuguese, a luta continua.
Continua. Victoria
Yes.
Sata.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thank you. And that'll be the end of this.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
I'll end it right now.